Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Resonance Academy Virtual Classroom. My name is Teresa Collins, and I'm the director of the Resonance Academy, and I'm going to be hosting this virtual classroom session today. And normally, our virtual classroom sessions are just for our delegates, our Academy delegates, and we host 3 of these kind of sessions a month. They get to hang out with Nassim for 2 hours every month, asking questions about their journey through the delegate program. And also, I'm going to make sure I go off of that for a minute. They get to ask questions of Nassim. They get to hear about his latest research, which you guys are going to get to do today. We also have sessions with all of our Academy faculty where the students can ask questions of the faculty and really learn from their different perspectives. And then we also have video enhanced breakout groups that our delegates get to enjoy a couple of times a month, where they get to connect with other delegates from all around the world and have the most amazing conversations. And this is the first time that we have offered a public virtual classroom event in a really long time, this Live with Nassim session, and the response to this session was amazing. We had thousands of people who signed up for this session, and so we've even had to go to Facebook Live, so we're out there if you're on Facebook too, so that we could accommodate everybody that wanted to come and hang out with Nassim today and kind of explore the topics that we're going to have. So we're really excited that you're here. And Nassim, I'm going to say a quick hi to you. I'm going to spotlight your video just so they can see you calling in from the office. Thanks for taking time to actually do a public live with Nassim. I've been so excited about this. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be with the delegates every month, but now it's even better to be with everybody. It's wonderful to, I love these sessions because it keeps me connected to the field out there, it keeps me connected to the public, and the questions that are asked are remarkable most of the time, and they make me have to think and consider different things, and the result is that we all learn together, and that's a wonderful thing about these kind of thing and the universe as a whole. And you know, I always enjoy as well when I see the difference it makes in people's life to have a deeper understanding of themselves, the world around them, and the universe as a whole, and the mechanics that makes that all possible. And you can see that at the core of their transformation is really like a sense of belonging and a sense of connection with the whole that develops as a result of these new worldviews becoming more and more prominent in their understanding, in their consciousness, in their day-to-day life. So it's always wonderful to be able to do these calls with the delegates, so with the public at large.
Great, thank you so much. And joining you today, you asked to have William on. William was actually just on a session with Nassim earlier this week, just for our delegates. We had such a good dialogue that he asked William to come on. William Brown is one of our faculty of the Resonance Academy. He's also one of the research staff for the Resonance Science Foundation, the biophysicist. William Brown, thank you for joining us today, William.
Thank you, Teresa. It's great to be with you all. For those who have joined us on some of our delegate level courses, you know, as I've often said, how much I love these Q&A type forums where we get to come together and have a good exploration of so many just fascinating, just interesting topics, and in particular delving into some good old unified physics, and getting to learn from the master himself, Harriman, who has, you know, done so much work with this particular topic. And, you know, I can already see the first question that came in is one that we could probably spend the entire session talking about. You know, it's just great because, you know, the group that we connect with is just so uh, uh, insightful into these matters, because so sure enough, the first question that came in is directly related to the work that me and Nassim have been doing around the Unified Space Memory Network, investigating some of the information processes, some of the fundamental information processes underlying physical phenomena, and how that can be related to evolution, development, consciousness, the emergence of intelligent systems, and that kind of great entanglement or connectivity that allows for coherent self-organizing systems, the development of structure and order in the universe. So I'm excited for today's discussion. So thank you for having me on.
Thanks. Yeah, glad to have you on. I'll tell you just a little bit about the Zoom system we're on, and then we'll get started with our session. We love this Zoom system. It's really been fantastic for our virtual classroom, being able to have these kind of quality interactions with our key faculty in Nassim and with the breakout groups from all around the world from the comfort of our own home. Everybody can be together, relaxed, but also connected. And you can see many of you have found the chat, because I'm seeing people in Nassim, you can see, and William, people from all around the world have been calling in. Everybody seems pretty excited to be able to be here today. So that's the place where you can just make comments and you can chat. There's also another little box, a little button on your control panel there that's for questions. And as William said, they have a lot they want to share today. There's a couple of new papers that just recently, one they're working on, one that's been out. Lots of exciting news. So I'm going to let them kind of go and start talking about some of the things they're most excited about, while William will also keep an eye on the questions. And so if there's some compelling questions coming in, that they might weave that into their process. So let's just see how that goes. And towards the end of the call, we're going to share some exciting things that are happening for us, including, I'm sure many of you seen, we're going to Egypt. So that's the idea of talking a little bit about ancient origins in unified physics. We also have the crystal. I think many of you seen that's out now. And we have some new things with the Academy that we want to tell you about. So that'll be at the end of the call. So before we start, Nassim, we all had the experience, or many of us had the experience in one way or the other of the eclipse the other day, which was an exciting kind of cosmic event. I know I was supposed to go and see it in person and didn't go because of work responsibilities and travel, but I got to watch through the NASA feed all the places where the eclipse went total, and the energy of the people and the announcers and things like that. And the one thing I noticed across every single one of them was they all used the same two words, amazing and incredible. Newscasters, nobody could come up with another word. They even commented on how funny that was. And they all said they had goosebumps all over their body, just complete goosebumps. And the crowds were all cheering. It seemed like everyone was experiencing a state of awe. And I just felt that was really powerful for right now, especially in this country with some of the challenges that we have, to have this moment of complete awe. And then when I mentioned that to you, you had some pretty wonderful things to say, amazing things to say about the eclipse. So I thought maybe you can touch in and give us some of your sense of the potency of this recent cosmic event.
Yeah, it was really, I always enjoyed the eclipse, and I was really, because you can feel, during eclipse something is happening. If only, the fact that you see celestial bodies in a configuration that you don't see often, and it makes you realize, because our daily life is so kind of linear in terms of, like, we're kind of looking horizontal at what we do. We're on the surface of the planet. We don't necessarily relate to a spherical object in the sky. It looks flat from our place, and and when you peer in the telescope for the first time, you realize you're part of this much larger network, this much larger clockwork, and it really makes a difference. Like, it expands your mind. And I was looking at the eclipse, and I was thinking about all the things I know about it, and all the technical, jargon that's involved with orbitals and how they relate to each other and all this. And I was thinking about a few amazing facts. One that has been mostly ignored is that many measurements were done throughout the years, I think starting in the 70s, that showed that very precise pendulums placed in the location of total eclipse, in the band of the total eclipse, vary in oscillation, so that a 13-degree approximately, if I remember well, alteration of the pattern of the pendulum occurs during the eclipse itself, and a return to normal after the eclipse. And, I always thought that was remarkable. I found this some 20 years ago, and I was really I was really amazed by it, because it really is telling you there's something physical occurring that is not unexpected. And this is why in general it's been buried, is that there's not really any good physics explanation why a pendulum should change its behavior during an eclipse. But it's saying something really important about gravity. And in the context of unified physics, it's actually saying something really important about information. And another fact that always blew my mind about eclipses is that the moon covers the sun in such a way, with such precision, that this perfect eclipse of the sun provides us with very important scientific information about the corona of the sun and the structure of solar flares and so on, since very early on, because when it happens, we can observe the corona in a way that we cannot at other times. And since all these observations from early on, we've developed techniques to produce artificial, eclipses of the sun, in our telescopes, so that we can study the corona. But with all of the technology we have today and all of the capabilities we have today, we haven't been able to reproduce the exact perfect eclipse that occurs when the moon crosses the limb of the sun. And that is remarkable. I found that remarkable, that nature actually did it in such a way, and that it is so precise that the moon size and its distance from the earth and its distance from the sun would produce this exact effect, like not approximately exact effect, so exact that we cannot reproduce it with all of our technology today. I always found that really interesting. The other thing is, why would a pendulum move and change its orientation of oscillation by some 13 degrees during an eclipse? Like, this is telling us something about gravity, right? And so instead of being ignored, it should have been studied very, very deeply. And it says something about gravity that actually, and since gravity is a result, according to Einstein's field equation, to space-time curvature, it says something very important about space-time and the way it curves. And what it says, according to unified science, according to the holographic mass solution, what it says is that space-time acts like a superfluid. And other scientists have come to those conclusions since when I started some 25 years or 30 years ago. And what do you, so think of space-time as a fluid, and imagine a planet, you know, or in this case a moon, you know, being in between, you know, a very large source of gravitational curvature and a smaller source, being the Earth. And think of it as like rocks in a stream. And if you had a stream running over the rocks, and there was only two rocks, you would have a certain pattern of the oscillation of the water. That is, you'd have a certain pattern of disturbance of the fluids around the two rocks. But then if you added a third rock, all of a sudden that pattern would change. And it would produce different type of turbulence that would create different effect on the small rock, that if those effects are gravitational, would modify the movement of pendulum in that region of the surface of that third rock. And it really tells us something very fundamental about the universe, because it says that basically space-time, it acts as, you know, a fluid, and since this fluid can be modified by relationship between objects, and here I'm referring to the Casimir effect, but let's not go too deep, then you could think of it as, you know, a modulation or a way to modify gravity in a local area, and that leads to very important technology, but that's a whole other thing. The other thing that I was thinking about is that these solar eclipses have been mapped by ancient civilizations in their calendar more precisely than modern calendars. There's actually ancient Mayan calendars and Inca calendars that track the solar eclipses very precisely, thousands of years ahead of their time, and I always thought that was amazing, that civilizations thousands of years ago somehow figured out the very complex orbital calculations required to be able to make those very precise calendar events and to inscribe them into a calendar system and develop a calendar system that would predict them, you know, in such a way that it's simple but extremely, extremely accurate. And I always thought, what were these people trying to tell us about eclipses that were so important? They definitely had traditions around them. They had mythology around them. The mythology talked about sun gods, talked about beings coming to the earth, all kinds of things. But certainly, it talked about a transfer of information, a transfer of knowledge that was coming from the great central sun, which in their cosmology relates directly to the center of the galaxy. And so there was some kind of transmission of information coming from the center of the galaxy or from the great central sun, if they meant something else, but it seemed that it related to the center of the galaxy, which is unknown how they would have known. but as well through our sun and during eclipses somehow became magnified or more available, and or informing the Earth. And so that kind of relates to that 13-degree variation on pendulums that I was talking about, because if you think of the superfluid of space-time as a Planck field, so think of it as like a plasma. A plasma is a highly ionized gas. Most of the universe is made of plasma. Imagine, and the stuff that's not plasma is basically plasma that's cooled down. So basically, if you think of that as, so imagine that the plasma particles, instead of being, electrons and protons, they're little Planck oscillation. A Planck oscillator is a unit of measurement. It's our only natural unit of measurement. It's based on gravitational constants and the speed of light. But it's a fundamental quantum in quantum physics. It's the base of quantum mechanics. If you think of this little oscillator as the particle that makes up that plasma, and it's really little, it's very, very little. Like the oscillation is a very high frequency because the size of the oscillator is very, very small. To give you an idea, if you grew one Planck oscillator to the size of a grain of sand, then the proton would have the diameter of our sun to Alpha Centauri, which is 40 trillion kilometers. So, it's way, way. So imagine a plasma, like a superfluid plasma, that makes up the structure of space-time. And now let's go back to our rock example, analogy, and imagine that now you're changing the flow of the plasma, right, by inserting a rock between the two, and it's producing a gravitational effect, right, because gravity is the curvature of that fluid, or the vorticity of that fluid. And so think about it as each Planck carrying a set of information. So like each Planck adding to one bit of information, like in information theory. And this is the base of the standard model, holographic principle, is that each Planck is one bit of information. And so think of it as information flowing as a plasma. And then think of it that all of a sudden there's an alteration of the information due to the position of the celestial body that produces certain alignments that generate very specific sets of information, very specific band, for instance, on the surface of the Earth, where a very specific set of information is being delivered. And so now it starts to make more sense that there's something really special that happens between, during eclipses, and that we should pay attention to it, if only to study the effects of gravity and the chemistry of the solar dynamics. So all this is the stuff I was thinking about during the eclipse. And I thought it was interesting that it related to ancient civilization that way. And since it's the subject of our talk today, I was thinking we should discuss it.
Great, thank you. Do you want to see? Should we see if William has anything he wants to add around that, or do you want to start diving into your conversations around? Whoops.
Teresa?
My internet just dropped, but you can still hear me because I'm on my phone also, so it's loading back up. Are we still on you, Nassim?
Yep.
Okay, great.
It's okay. So I can continue going for a little while.
Yeah, let's do it, because I know we wanted to really focus in on the physics and the new paper you guys are doing, the Space Memory Network. Why don't we kind of launch into a little bit about what you're most excited about?
Yeah, there's been a lot of really interesting developments at the Resonance Science Foundation. We've been writing papers in parallel, a paper on the electron, a paper on cosmology, which we presented at the Royal Society in England last year, and multiple papers on the relationship between consciousness and unified physics, with the help of William Brown, which is on the call today. So we've been kind of going at it at all scales, right? From the electron to the universe to the people in between. And it's pretty exciting because they all relate with each other. And they all relate with each other based on this deeper understanding of the structure of space-time and how space-time produced the material world. Because the equations tells us very specifically that what we call the material world is basically a very specific dynamic of space-time. And that dynamic has to do with how space-time create coherent regions that all of a sudden basically appears to us as the material world, from the space to the material world, where space is not empty. It's full of this information, it's full of that energy. And when it creates co-moving structure, that is when the Plancks all move in a very coherent manner in a region, that region develop electromagnetic or electrostatic fields and creates a boundary, and that boundary is what we call the material world. We can call it a proton or an electron, and it makes up all of the atoms we see, the proton being the nuclei and the electron being the orbital charge around that nuclei. And we've solved those equations for the proton, and most people know that by now, but we've solved it for the electron recently as well. And not just the hydrogen electron, but for all of the atoms in the table of elements. And it's extremely precise, and it uses 0 free parameters, and it outputs very, very specific predictions that are as precise as the mainstream, in some case more precise as the mainstream view, but it does so with first principle, where the standard model utilizes some 21 assumption to get there. And so it's very precise, and it is from first principle, and so that's really exciting. And then on the cosmological side, we imagine that proton or that electron escaping our universe and entering a larger universe where the energy density in the space is much lower. And in that larger universe, then that little particle expands very rapidly. And we can calculate the expansion rate, but we actually, more interestingly, calculate the change in density inside the particle, inside the proton, if it escaped our universe into a less dense universe, and the rate of expansion. And from there, we can calculate the size and density of the larger universe we would be in, but as well, we can develop a new theory of cosmogenesis, in which instead of a big bang, you have an expansion of a particle. The current Big Bang assumes that the universe started at the Planck scale, right? So it's not so, how do you say, outside the box to think that the proton could be the genesis of our universe, because it's much larger than a Planck scale. But when we calculate the expansion of that other universe, and so the expansion of this proton as it grows to the size of a universe, being the genesis of a universe, we get the correct solution for dark matter. That is, we get the correct solution for the expansion and acceleration of our universe that we observe in our measurements. So it's very exciting that it comes out just right. And it's funny that in 2013, when we were starting to write that paper, it takes us a while to write physics paper. At the same time, Einstein published a paper, and I was astonished. And he published it because he was basically writing this paper, of course, when he was alive, and it was about cosmological genesis and expansion. And he was trying to get away from the Big Bang Theory because he didn't think it was appropriate or accurate. And so in this model, he had developed a model in which there was a steady state of creation and loss of material from our universe in such a way that protons were being produced out of the structure of the vacuum. And this is at the time of Einstein. Out of the structure of the vacuum, matter creation was occurring. And the matter creation that was occurring from the vacuum fluctuation was equal to the amount of energy or amount of matter that was lost by our universe, creating a steady state universe. And that paper was lost to humanity until 2013, when it was discovered in a file in Tel Aviv University, where it had been lost. And so that was published, and it was basically very close to what we were writing in the solution I just explained from the holographic mass solution. And we're really excited that we're able to cite Einstein 2013 in our paper. But as well, at the human level, and so, we have been writing papers on consciousness, and William is probably better suited to describe those papers. I do the physics for it. William helps with all the biology, but it really is an amazing, document. And I think it really does a good job at giving a first step view of the relationship between physics and biology, and the evolution of biology into complex system and eventually into self-awareness. So, William, what would you say about it?
Yeah, well, so, this paper is entitled, it's got a subtitle, From Cosmogenesis to Consciousness. And so the idea there is kind of that this paper is addressing and explaining everything from the beginning, that initial genesis event of our universe, to some of its most complex structures expressed via the living organisms on Earth, in particular Homo sapiens. Now, that sounds like a very ambitious, or if not bold, endeavor, right, to explain that kind of expansive topic. And obviously, you've got some pretty intricate complexity involved somewhere in between those two steps, right? But part of the solution is, in fact, that if anything, Nassim has shown that through his physics, that the universe is built on relatively simple principles, principles that a child could understand. And in fact, I think I've heard him comment that Einstein once said that, if your model can't be understood by a 10-year-old child, it's probably not correct. And there's a reason for that. You need a relatively simple, strong base to build great complexity upon. And so, we identify this relatively simple base upon which the great complexity and intricate connectivity of our physical world, can be explained. For instance, one of the simple concepts, which has to do with information. So, we know that information is emerging as one of the key concepts in understanding the universe and the physical phenomenology within it. This is emerging as the holographic physics, and kind of in that term hologrammic, you have the idea of information. Well, so what are one of these simple foundational principles that can get us from cosmogenesis to the human brain, the human being, in the consciousness expressed in that system? Well, you have, for instance, information feedback mechanisms. And we actually explain in our paper how the simple process of an information feedback, computation, and output can drastically change the normal probabilistic outcomes that you have in conventional science, right? It's random, it's stochastic. Outcomes do not have a set kind of algorithm to them. Well, with this simple algorithmic-like function, you can drastically reduce this huge spectrum, this huge landscape of probabilities down to very narrow and very coherent outcomes. And we give several examples of this, and probably the best example, of course, is in biogenesis. And biogenesis is one of those middle steps between cosmogenesis and the emergence of beings
self-awareness,
of extreme complexity of awareness.
Yeah. Right.
And so when you look at the biological system, obviously you're talking about the epitome of systems complexity, right? Nothing is easily explained. Certainly when you're talking about, the elemental level of the biological system, which is molecular biology. And so we look at some of the key molecular biological systems that support life. These are foundational systems to the emergence of life, and systems with the kind of information processes that would be easily identifiable as a living system versus your just purely physical system. And so, we do a calculation. Okay, so we've got this enzyme, this biomolecule that's involved in transcribing the information stored in the DNA. So this is an extremely central aspect. There's three pivotal things that make a living organism distinguishable from a purely physical system that you might call abiotic or prebiotic. One of those is the decoding of information, the storage of information, and the decoding of that information. So obviously, information is stored in the DNA. Well, there's an enzyme, a molecule, a protein that decodes that information into functional products, proteins. So you need that to have life. One of the problems is that that molecule has such extreme complexity that we calculated something like 10 to the 4,000 potential configurations, 4,000 and some change, potential configurations. So, this molecule is made up of subunits, and you can have one of actually about 100 different kind of subunits in each position. So you've got 10 to the 4,000 and change potential configurations of this molecule. So how does that evolve randomly?
Right. Well, the probabilities is 10 to the 8,896, I believe, that are calculated in the paper, right?
Even higher.
Right, right. And so just so people understand what that number is, because people don't really necessarily understand exponents. Well, a good example would be a centimeter, right? A centimeter is very small, and the universe is really big, right? So, like, there's billions of galaxies. Each galaxy has billions of stars. Most stars are much larger than our sun. Our sun looks like a grain of sand compared to most stars. And so the universe is really big. But the radius of the universe, the observable universe, which is, significantly large, is 10 to the 28 centimeters. So that's the radius of the observable universe. So 10 to the 8,896 in terms of probabilities, so it's 1 to 1 to 1 to 10 to the 8,896 is basically zero probability that molecule just happened because things are bumping into each other and randomly, and somehow this thing happened. And this is just one thing that's got to happen. We're made of 100 trillion cells, and they duplicate. There's like 1,000 billion chemical change.
1,000 billion.
Oh yeah, sorry, 1,000 billion chemical change occurring every second for all this to happen. And these molecules are working hard, right?
Yeah. And so I think the term we use is, we're very subtle about it. We say, this is hyper astronomically improbable. That this is going to emerge via a random stochastic process, an undirected or blind type process. Those are actually the kind of terms that are used in the consensus model, the predominant model, to explain this kind of hyper-astronomical improbability. One of the papers, we may even cite it, I don't know, it says, its title is Winning the Cosmic Jackpot, winning the cosmic lottery, because that is the scientific explanation.
Really bad.
That is the scientific explanation, is that, well, yeah, it's hyper-astronomically improbable, but we just happen to win the cosmic lottery.
That's right. That's right. And then, and we keep winning it every second, like there's no tomorrow, because the probability that all that actually works out to 100 trillion cells, is very, very low. Like if we were to calculate those probabilities, then the number would even get more astronomical. And so in that paper, and this relates to our evolution, and it does relate to ancient civilization and consciousness relating to the information that's available in the universe, meaning the idea that evolution is a linear learning curve may not be correct, meaning that it can learn in certain ways. Yes, it evolves in certain ways, for instance, technologically, but it doesn't necessarily, mean that it has evolved in its capacity to interact or to understand fundamentally the relationship it has to the world, the universe as a whole, and themselves. And I was seeing in the comments people saying, but what about consciousness being primary? Like this is the thing you get a lot nowadays, especially from the spiritual community. And, I always, it's correct. I mean, it's a good thought that actually there's an organizing principle. The problem with that statement is that if you say that consciousness is primordial and you don't describe what consciousness is, you might as well have started a religion again, and call it God or call it whatever you want, call it goddess, whatever, and not explain what it is. And you still have dogma. You still have, you still don't understand the mechanics because consciousness is undefined. What is that? Self-awareness. Okay, well, how does it happen? And so what we're saying this is much more profound, and people need to understand that. And we're not saying that consciousness has nothing to do with it. We are placing consciousness at the center of creation, at the center of the universe, but we're not doing it just arbitrarily. We're actually saying, and we describe this in this paper, that consciousness is actually a feedback of information in the structure of space and in the network of space. And that, because particles are entangled, and that's, very much proven in laboratory that you can entangle particles. And now many theories are starting to show that particles are most likely entangled by wormholes, and that these wormholes interact with black holes at the cosmological level, and that entangles the cosmological level with the quantum level. And if you're interested in this piece of information, look up ER equals EPR. But in any case, you can see that consciousness is actually a flow of information in the structure of space-time, and that flow of information is responsible for the material world that you're made of. And that's what's and the biology that emerged from it, which that's the exciting part, William.
Yeah. So, I have difficulty with this particular area because I just cannot actually get my mind into that level of linear type thinking. They would say this before that. Mm-hmm. This kind of chicken or the egg type mindset. It's I don't know why you would put yourself into that box, which is oftentimes what you get from many individuals when we begin speaking about this. Obviously, you need both. Chicken or the egg. You need both of those. You can't really have one without the other. Well, it's kind of the same with consciousness. Consciousness or matter or consciousness. Well, actually, you can't really have one without the other. You need both. Now, I know that the spiritual community and even what you experience spiritually would seem to be at odds with this, just because consciousness has transcendent characteristics. But those transcendent characteristics are actually one of the reasons why it's so integral to the formation of structure and order in the evolution and development of the universe from the beginning that Genesis event that Nassim was describing, which what was the beginning of our universe, not the beginning of everything, because it's a multiverse. But consciousness also, though, I believe, needs a stratum to work within. What would be just a purely unembodied consciousness? Yeah. So I believe that the solution is very much both and that's where the science. That's what the science suggests. That's
Exactly.
where, yeah.
Exactly. The feedback structure, that occurs, is required for organizations to occur. So they, for instance, in the Connected Universe movie, we give an example of a Rubik's Cube, and the probabilities of solving a Rubik's Cube. And if you give it to a blind person and ask them to order it blindly, the probabilities of you ordering the sixth space of a Rubik's Cube by random chances are in the quintillions. And if it takes a second each move, you exceed the time since the beginning of the universe by billions and billions of years just to order a Rubik's Cube, which is much simpler than all the biological complexity we see. And so, but if you tell the blind person yes or no every time they make a move, you give them just one bit of feedback, within 2.5 minutes, the Rubik's Cube is going to be ordered. So feedback is the key there. And this is where consciousness comes in. And because consciousness is feedback. Consciousness is self-awareness, is feedback. It's like you seeing yourself in a mirror and saying, that is me. I understand this is me. And I understand I'm in this world and I'm exploring this world, right? The exploration of this world comes from feedback. You're receiving signals, electromagnetic signals that are going in your eyes, electric signals that are coming from your fingers, electric signals coming from your nose, and all this. And this is giving you information that you're feeding to yourself. Now, I was seeing in the chat as well, people asking, what does wormhole have to do with this and all this? Well, the physics we wrote to describe the mass and radius of a proton, which is very precise, but as well has been confirmed in experimental studies. That is, I made a prediction using this theory, and that prediction was confirmed in accelerators in Switzerland that measured the radius of the proton more precisely than any other measurements before. And that precise measurement, was correct. And the prediction was correct, and is inside 1 sigma of the experiment. That means it's inside the margin of error of the experiment. That means that the theoretical prediction may be more precise even than the experiment, but the experiment is slowly getting to it. And just as a parenthesis, in some 30 years or 3 decades of string theory, and thousands and thousands and thousands of physicists and billions of dollars spent into string theory, no such prediction ever occurred. Like, not one prediction was the output of string theory today that confirmed it in any way, shape, or form. This unified view is now confirmed by experiment that way. And basically what it says about the proton, though, which is remarkable, is that there is the same amount of information inside the volume of a proton in terms of Planck oscillators as there is outside that proton in the whole universe. That is, the information or the mass of the universe in terms of information is present inside 1 proton. How can that be true? Well, that can only be true if all particles are entangled. If all particles are entangled, and all the information is instantaneous and shared. All volumes are, together. And so now you can imagine each proton connected through wormholes to all these other protons in the universe. And these wormholes, they're micro wormholes that are at the Planck scale in the structure of space. And this might sound completely irrational and outside what's believed in the standard model, but as I mentioned, other physicists are coming to similar conclusions, that entanglement is the result of wormholes connecting particles, and that, so imagine a particle that falls into a black hole on one side, and the particle that's entangled within, when it falls into another black hole on the other side, well, now the black holes are entangled. And so you can imagine that everything is entangled that way. And the only reason we think that some particles are entangled and some particles are not is because when we measure a particle here, if it's entangled with another particle on the other side of the universe, we don't have access to it. So when we modify this one, we're not measuring any changes, right, on the other side of the universe of that particle pair that it's entangled with. But when we produce entanglement in a laboratory, which we do, and we measure, like if we change the polarization angle of one of the particles, the other one change instantaneously, no matter how far they are from each other. Even if the distance from each other is more than at the speed of light, the information could go to the other, it's still instantaneous. Well, when we do that in the laboratory, we have access to the two sides of the wormhole, which are the particles. But in all the other particles that we measure, we don't necessarily have access, or we don't necessarily know that it's entangled with the particle. It doesn't have to be on the other side of the universe. Could be entangled with the particle that's in the table in the laboratory. They're 2 rooms down from where you are. And you wouldn't know that when you're moving this one is changing its polarization angle, because you're not measuring it, right? So it's but what's remarkable in this equation is that then the mass of the universe is involved in the calculation to figure out the mass of the proton and the mass and the radius of the proton. And it basically says that the information that's inside the volume is restricted by a surface, and that surface cannot let enough information escape for you to measure a larger mass. So what the information that's able to be transferred through the wormholes, because they can only connect to the surface, there's a limited amount of connection, that are Planck distance connection. So there's a limited amount of information that's being able to transfer, and that's what we call mass. And when you do that calculation, it comes out right. It doesn't just come out right, it comes out extremely right, extremely precisely right, and it's confirmed in laboratory. So what we're telling you is that you're connected to all of the information of the universe through the entangled world that you live in, and the complexity that you see in this world, which is extreme, which is remarkable. The complexity you see is the result of this information exchange, this entanglement, that the universe talking to itself. And you're part of it, and that's why you're talking to yourself. I don't know if you all do that. I do that myself. But, but literally, this is how organization happen. And that is consciousness, right? The whole thing is talking, and so it's not like consciousness is this thing that just like appears out of nowhere. These are the mechanics of how. So if you're going to say consciousness is fundamental, you got to explain how. What are the mechanics that makes that true? And here you have them. And so that's really important, because it actually makes it real.
Wow. That was a pretty powerful answer to the question about, is consciousness primary? That was great.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, that there are some people on here that are saying, are you going to answer some questions? And I know William's been looking at some of the questions, so I wonder, Nassim, if you're open for him to throw a couple of questions your way between you guys for this next short.
Absolutely. Let's do that. Let's hear from the field. We've been babbling.
Okay. Of course, there are so many amazing questions. This is a very challenging job to pick out one. But let's see. I might go with one that is very related to even the opening conversation about the description of space-time and hence gravity having a fluid property and being able to explain this via fluid dynamics. So Paul Seletsky asked, space-time as a superfluid and fluid dynamics, much like Bose-Einstein condensates. Spin seems to be so common at all levels. Can you elaborate on the fluid dynamics and how it relates to black holes? So, what kind of fluid dynamics?
Good question, and we should talk about ancient civilization as well, because it relates to all this. We were talking about consciousness. If consciousness is linked to the way matter actually comes together and produce biology, that means you could have very advanced thoughts. Doesn't matter your level of technology, about the structure of the universe, and understand very fundamental things without necessarily having the technological means to experimentally prove it, but you might be able to actually understand maybe gravity in different ways, that you could interact with it in a different way, or the electromagnetic field and so on. You could have an evolution that looks vastly different from us. For instance, it might bypass a large amount of our industrial revolution and go right to very, very advanced technology without passing by fossil fuel, for instance, and so on. But and it has to do with the question. The question is, how does fluid dynamics relate to black holes? And it does. Let me just think of a superfluid as your water in your tub, and you pull the plug, and it produces a vortex. It produces a little coherent region over the plug where the water is going in. And in that region, if you have a rubber ducky in your tub, and you put it there, it will orbit that region of space. And if you didn't know that there's water molecules spinning there, you would probably think that the rubber ducky is going down the drain or orbiting there because the surface of the water is curved. And that would be an analogy to an Einstein field equation. Einstein field equation describes space-time as a surface that's curving around the mass of an object, and that the result is that another object is attracted. Well, a black hole would be one of those very high level curvature of that space. In fact, the equation Zarrod says, well, actually there's one of those. There's a singularity at the center of all gravitational field, but that is another story. But basically think of it as little vortices. Now, imagine that a black hole is not a thing. And that's really what we have to get away from. This idea that things are things is incorrect. Things are not things. And the things are actually nothing because matter is actually just a boundary in the structure of space, meaning when we examine matter very closely, like a proton or an electron, all we can say is that in that region of space, there's a high charge component, a high electrostatic charge that's producing a boundary. These things are not billiard balls of some material. They make up the material. They can't be made out of material. And so they are actually little charge in the structure of space. So instead of thinking of things as things, think of things as the dynamic of a field of space. So imagine a black hole at the center of a galaxy, for instance, being the place where the water is going down the drain. And it's producing this curvature. But why is the water going down the drain? The water is going down the drain because particles of water are orbiting in that region of space, and they're co-moving. In that region of space, it's coherent. The water molecules are coherently moving together. In another region of your bath, if you move your rubber ducky on the other side of the bath, the molecules are moving in a more random way. The rubber ducky is not going anywhere. It's not feeling any gravitational field. It's not feeling anything. But if you bring it where the molecules are coherently moving, then all of a sudden it starts orbiting. It acts like it's being attracted. Well, so Einstein got it right. It's curvature of space-time. It's just that he didn't describe what space-time is made of. And this is why, to this day, if you ask a standard physicist, a physicist that work under gravitational theories, like a field physicist, general relativity physicist, do we know what gravity is? If he's honest, or she's honest, they're gonna say no, we don't, because Einstein said it's a curvature of spacetime, but didn't say what spacetime is made of. Now from these equations, from the holographic mass solution, we see that spacetime is made of this superfluid Planck plasma, and so imagine where that superfluid Planck plasma orbits, just like the water molecule in our analogy, where this coherent orbital of the Planck plasma, you have a large mass, a large gravitational field. And that's what a black hole is. It's literally a super fluid plasma vortex of Planck's. And it's, makes up the structure of a galaxy, the whole thing. And what we see as the galaxy is the stuff that's stuck in the Planck fluid dynamics. And that's why we're missing 80% the mass of galaxies. This is what they call dark matter, that they had to throw in. 80% of the mass of the galaxy had to be thrown in as a free parameter for our equations to actually work, so that they represent what we see in the sky. Otherwise, our equation says that all the stars should have spun out of a galaxy a long time ago. So they have to add mass so that there's enough gravity to keep everything together. And the part that they miss is that the galaxy mass is not just the stars in it. It's the Planck field orbiting, producing curvature. That is the mass of the galaxy. And the stars in it produce more mass, of course, but each star has gravity because it's orbiting a little Planck field itself. And then each atom that makes up those stars is orbiting a little Planck field itself, and we call them protons and electrons. And so that is what we're describing as our universe, and it works. The math works, and it tells us something really profound about the world and ourselves in it, because these little vortexes, they can organize in all kinds of ways, including into wormhole ways, and they connect everything. And so, yeah, that was an interesting question. I got to make shorter answers so that we can have more questions.
No, I just think we always need more time. Usually on our live Nassim sessions for the students, for the delegates, we go 2 hours, and we mostly are just asking and answering questions and bringing the delegates on. We can't do that on the public event. There's just too many of us, but if you come and join us in the Academy, you can have a lot more of this kind of dialogue. Nassim, I wonder, one of the questions that came on, and we might need to kind of move in this direction for timing, is people were asking about the pendants that you're wearing. And one of the things that is really exciting is that, 30 years of your research is being manifested into form right now that we're going to be able to utilize. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about the crystal that you're wearing and what's happening around that for people, because they've been asking.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been a really interesting period because of all this excitement about bringing this technology forward. So it took me a while to get it out. It's the result of some of the experiments I did in 1999 in my first laboratory, and it's a crystalline structure that's grown in laboratory in such a way that all of the molecules are lined up to the fundamental geometry of the crystal, the actual macro geometry, so that there is a coherency between the macro geometry and the micro geometry in such a way, and the cut is extremely precise, and it's precisely tuned to harmonic relationship to the Planck field, so that it has the maximum amount of oscillation capability relative to the Planck field, so that you can imagine the tetrahedral molecules of the crystal and then the global behavior of the crystal having this capacity to oscillate. And then it's mounted into a titanium saddle. Inside the titanium saddle is micro bumpers that are silicon bumpers that maintain the crystal in its position, and that allows the crystal as well to oscillate without dampening, for instance, when you place it on the surface. And so the crystal is able to oscillate, and then inside the metric as well, inside the titanium is very, very tiny magnets that are placed in such a configuration so that they always are in attraction, and so that you can snap your little crystal into your pendant or into a water bottle or all kinds of devices that are going to become available. And then the crystal is placed with the titanium saddle in a very special chamber that have patent technology in it that allows rotational fields of electromagnetic rotational fields into the millions of RPMs, so that you have this highly structured electromagnetic polarization in this chamber, and then the polarization field produce a higher level of coherency in the crystal itself. So we actually have the polar structure of the molecule becoming aligned, a little bit like a magnet is made from iron, for instance, where the iron particles and molecules are not all aligned, so you don't really have a permanent magnet. And then you apply a large magnetic field to it, you align the particles, and all of a sudden you get a larger field effect that we call a magnetic field, like in a static magnet or a permanent magnet. So it's a little bit the same with the crystal, except that it produces an information field. And according to what we found, since information moving is gravity, you could think of it as a little gravitational field. So I call it a little gravitational laser, and so it becomes like a region of space that produce that vorticity, that produce that coherency in that region. So if you approach the crystal to your water bottle, right, and you leave it there for a few minutes, the water molecule in the bottle will start changing because the water molecule is tetrahedral as well. And we're seeing now evidence that the water molecule is actually the part that's oscillating the DNA, right, William? This is some of the stuff we're discovering. And yeah, was published at the Science Academy, I believe.
Yeah. So, although it's always been acknowledged to a certain degree that the water is fundamental, central to the proper geometry, the proper conformation of biomolecules. It's interesting that even with that kind of acknowledgement universally, it's still ignored. And I think it's because, in part, it's been kind of a naive expectation of the role of water, that, it's simple kind of hydrophilic, hydrophobic interactions, which is, certain substances like to be in water, so to speak, and certain substances don't like to be in water. And this kind of interaction determines the shape, the geometry of all biomolecules. And you might have heard that physics is geometry. Well, biology is geometry. The configuration, the three-dimensional configuration of biomolecules is the determining factor in their functionality.
Right.
More recently, techniques have emerged that enable a higher resolution observation of the kind of dynamics that are occurring between water and biomolecules. So obviously, this is on an extremely small scale and an extremely fast scale. Interactions are occurring on the femtosecond scale. So you're talking about fractions of a nanosecond in terms of some of these kind of interactions. Well, what they were able to show is that water is absolutely instrumental in the function of everything from the DNA molecule to proteins, not only on their three-dimensional configuration, their geometry, but on their functionality. So, for instance, you need proteins to bind the DNA to read the information encoded in there. Well, one of the things that's been missing in this description for a long time is that in between that protein binding to the DNA and reading the information, there's water. And that water mediates the reception, the recognition, as well as light. So, there's also biophotons being emitted via the water matrix. But water is instrumental in the recognition of specific sequences, so that, say, for instance, the DNA is properly read.
Yeah, and so a modification of the water molecule is very critical. Mm-hmm. Meaning that any changes in the water molecule coherency, or structure, is going to make a large difference in terms of biological mechanisms. And so, and we know that the water molecule can take all kinds of configuration, some very amorphous and some very highly structured, where there's coalition of molecules that produce higher geometry structures, such as microclusters and so on, and easy water or exclusion zones and so on. And basically what we found is that these little coherent region modifies the water molecule because the water molecule is interacting with the vacuum itself. It's tetrahedral in nature. And so what happens is then if you take the water that you just place the crystal beside, and you water a plant with it, that plant, and we've done thousands of tests, William is in charge of all the biological tests we've done there, huh? We've never had a negative result, right, William?
Yeah, when you place a crystal with plants or with water that is given to plants, you see an effect.
Right.
We've never had an experiment where there wasn't at least a 50 to 70% difference in the behavior of the test organism versus the control.
Right. But in general, what is the percentage of change in growth, for instance?
So on average, we've done thousands of experiments, and on average, most of those see a minimum of 100% difference in, for instance, growth rate with our test group versus the control. The control being under all the same environmental conditions, but without the ARC crystal technology. Now, in some of the more higher level results, we've seen growth rates as high as 350% greater growth rates. But I mean, we measure a number of different parameters, including seed germination rate. So with that, with the ARC crystal, you'll see 100% seed germination rate, and in the control group, you might only get 70%. A lot of the seeds fail to even germinate. So spectral analysis of the phytonutrient content and chlorophyll content, we see an upwards of 7,000% greater phytonutrient content, a deeper pigmentation relative to the control group. So, there's some pretty significant
markers.
Yeah.
And basically, you're made out of water. 75% water, and in fact, that's an average because the brain is like 90%, and so on. And so what happens is, so we can see very specific changes in even like resistance to pathogens in the plants, and their life cycle extension, and their germination of seed increase, like in some case 500% more seed production than the controls, and all this. So this is really significant. And as I said, I've been studying it for a long time, and I'm finally able to bring those to the market because the difficulty in producing the accuracy of the cuts was a big problem. The way it was grown, and so on. So going to production took a while, and it's actually, only very recently that we have cutting techniques and cutting devices that will allow to have the precision that I was requiring for us to be able to bring it to the market. So I'm really excited. And still at this point, we can only produce 1,000 a month. So, if you want to pre-order, it's a good time, because the first 1,000 is almost gone, and that means that you'll be on the waiting list for at least a month before you get yours, and so on. So we're really excited to have them out there, and as well to get the feedback from the people of the experience they're having from it. I've been wearing mine for a month and a half, and it's made a huge difference in my energy levels and my well-being. So I'm pretty excited to see what it's doing out there, and so that was really good.
Yeah.
That
Nassim, could you say something about the gathering? I know, part of what we wanted to touch on was ancient origins of the unified physics, and I know there's people super excited about that, and they're asking, like, let's do another, live event with the public so we can dive deeper, and I think with the response we had, we'll definitely do that. But I know part of it is that we're taking those crystals and we're actually going to Egypt to do some of our own personal study there. Do you want to say something about that with the
So with the coming of the crystal, I felt we were ready finally to have yearly gathering of the people taking the delegate course. Of course, there's thousands of people taking it, and it's, I think there's 80 countries involved at this point,
Yeah.
from all around the world. And I was wanting to create these yearly gatherings. So people gather every month and we see each other, and we meet across the world, but to get an opportunity to all come together and go to a special place and experience each other and learn and experience these very important places on Earth. Think of the fluid dynamics of space-time again, and think of gravity as being the result of these fluid dynamics. And you can think of very specific places in the world where they would be like vortices, turbulence. Some of the more spiritual people can feel them, in certain regions where they're very strong, like Mount Shasta is thought to be a vortex, Sedona and all these places. But places like Hawaii, for instance, we know there's geomagnetic vortices at the North and South Pole. Those are larger, but you can imagine Hawaii, for instance, being one of those turbulence in space-time where the vortex is constantly, connected to the surface at this region, and it producing the volcanoes, and as the plate moving to the continental drift, producing one volcano after the other, which is the islands of Hawaii. But you think of the red spot on Jupiter as being one of those vortices. So we see the red spot. We don't know why it stays there, where it doesn't move. It's not like a hurricane that goes around and then, dissipates. It just stays there. So think of this thing. Now, there's sacred sites on the planet that happens to be in those regions or that produce this kind of turbulence in space-time. And these buildings, which brings us to the part of the title of this talk, which was Ancient Civilization and Physics. We didn't do much on ancient civilization because we get so much involved in the physics. We have so much fun with it. But imagine there's buildings all around this world that just don't belong. They just defies everything we have in the modern technology to reproduce them. One of them being the pyramids of Egypt at Giza, and others in Egypt, and temples and various statues. Like, for instance, there's a statue of Ramses II that is in excess of 1,000 tons, like 1,000 tons. This is non-trivial. And it comes from miles and miles away, hundreds of miles. It was quarried hundreds of miles from where it's found. And currently, if we want to lift 1,000 tons, we need one of the largest land crane on Earth. And we're not going to go over sand dunes and desert with it. We're going to pick up, usually these parts that are really heavy are usually boat parts. And we pick it up, we move a few feet, we turn, and we drop it into a boat. But we don't go across, rivers and mountain ranges and dunes, sand dunes, and all this with it. So there's these anomalies, and if there was only one or two, that would be one thing. But there's thousands of these anomalies all around the world, everywhere, and they're non-trivial. One of them is the Grand Pyramid at Giza. 2,300,000 stone. 2,300,000 stone, folks. It's non-trivial, and they're assembled perfectly, highly accurately aligned to the north, and in such a way that even modern buildings that were attempting to align to the north, to the cardinals, weren't able to reproduce that level of precision. And those buildings are vastly more simple and smaller in mass than the pyramid at Giza. So 2,300,000 stone. When they reach the apex, Well, we don't know. But today, the apex is 1/4 of an inch off the center of the base after placing 2,300,000 stone, right? And the base is 13 acres square. So, like, no engineering corporation on earth, and even if you put all corporations together, would attempt or be able to reproduce anything with that level of precision or that level of capacity to move significant amount of mass in significant amount of time, like in short amount of time, because archaeologists tells us the pyramids were built in 20 years. So, simple calculation, 2,300,000 stone, 20 years. Okay, they can't work 24/7, right? So they're at best they're working maybe 12/7, and then you make the calculation, 365 days, 12/7. Now they're placing a stone every 4 minutes with that level of precision, because if you get a few grains of sand in the wrong spot, on level 4, by the time you're at level like 350, you're off, like seriously. So now you got high precision. Every 4 minutes they're placing a stone. But then the archaeologist tells us, well, actually the slave farmers kind of thing that they're calling the people that built this could only do this during the seasons of the Nile, where the Nile floods the agricultural land, and they then the public out there, the 100,000 slaves claimed to have built the pyramid, are now free to go and build pyramids for 3 months out of the year. So they only have 3 months. So now you have 3 months, 12/7. How fast? Now the stones are going in every few seconds. So you have to be putting stones in. Now, that just doesn't add up. And the pyramids is not the only thing. Like I said, there's all kinds of temples, and it's not only in Egypt, it's everywhere. There's all kinds of stuff, thousands of examples, from Mayan country to Inca country to Chinese to Japanese underwater structure, all kinds of stuff all around the world. Spherical balls found in the middle of nowhere everywhere. It's remarkable. And so something, and I think people should refer to Graham Hancock has done very good research on ancient civilization. Something happened to our evolution that was not linear, that was not, from monkeys to humans. There was all kinds of strange events that occurred, that the evolution of technology and advancement might have gone through multiple levels or multiple rise and extinction prior to our current written history, which is actually pretty recent. And more and more researchers are finding evidence that, like, some of these buildings are not as believed, 300 BC or 400 BC, but are much older, like France, Göbekli Tepe, which is 13,000 years old, with monoliths, when people were supposed to be hunters and gatherers, where humans were supposed to be running around half naked, running after animals with whatever they could find, and to eat and survive. And all of a sudden you have these amazing, intricate, very complex monolithic structures in the middle of that, that not only were built, but that were on purpose buried, under millions of tons of sand, right? And so this is non-trivial. So there's all these anomalies, and people should know that. They should, and instead of ignoring it, you know, and thinking, oh, you know, there must be some explanation. Like, really look at it, because some of the information that's in the symbology of these ancient civilizations relates directly to the physics and of this unified field, of this unified understanding of physics, this emergence of the discovery that the world is entangled, that everything is connected, and it makes a very specific, you know, geometric configuration for that to happen. And that geometry is expressed in many of these ancient symbols. And I was fascinated by that very early on. And so, parallel to my studies in physics, from early 80s and 90s, I started to study ancient civilization at the same time, because I could see relationship between what I was studying in physics and ideas I was having in physics and ancient civilization symbology. So, you know, this is why we're going to Giza. This is why we're going to continue every year to go to sacred sites and bring the coherency structure of space-time devices, you know, the arc crystal, advanced kinetic resonance kinetic. And when we bring those, then we increase the coherent field in that region of space. And so, you know, we are like lighting up the grid, if you'd like, in such way that we're, you know, you can think of it as increasing the amount of information available in the region of space, and that region being the Earth morphogenetic field. And we can see that this morphogenetic field exists. We, you know, some of the measurements come from random generators around the world. They can see that when very specific events that are publicized, you know, like 911 or other events that are very much publicized, and where people are very much affected, they can see a change in the behavior of random generators all around the world. These are computers that are built specifically to output random functions that all of a sudden start to output coordinated, coherent information, you know, very specific to those events. Like literally, you can see the planes hitting the buildings in the 911 event, as where the computers all went, you know, more coherent, and then back to random, and then more coherent, and back to random. So, and we can see the same in less dramatic events, which have to do with global meditations, for instance, where, you know, enough people around the world coordinate their intent, and all of a sudden, because remember, as we described at the beginning of this call, if consciousness is actually the feedback flow that produces creation, we are having an influence on the material world around us, including computers. And so, you know, if you love your car, it'll run better. But, you know, all this was to at least have a little tranche on ancient civilization before we close. I think it's remarkable. I think there's amazing things to discover there, and we're discovering them. There's more and more archaeological finds around the world that really deepens the mystery of all kinds of artifacts and remains that are unusual, at, you know, to say the least. And I think we are discovering a very important part of our past that has been lost, and the discovery of that path lead down the path directly to very advanced knowledge and very advanced technology that can make a very important impact on the evolution of our society today and our capacity to overcome the challenges we all face at this time in history.
Mm. Yeah, and so I'm so excited we're going. I posted a link there that if anybody wants to join us, we do close our registration on September 1st. And everybody who comes gets to have one of the crystals. That's going to be part of it. So there's a link there if you're interested. And I think, Nassim, we're going to have to come back and do one on ancient origins of unified physics, because I think there's a lot of interest in it. So it'll be fun to do. And I just want to say to the people that are on, we still have, quite a few people listening on Facebook and here. And we're just going to go just a little bit longer because I wanted to bring Chris on. We are launching something today with the Resonance Academy, which I think people will be excited about. And then I just wanted you and William to have a moment to make your closing statements. They're always really, potent of what you want to share with the community. So we'll just finish up, stay on if you can. The recording will be available. And Chris, I'm just going to bring you on for a second. And I'm going to post a link in the thing that I'd love for you. This is Chris Almeida. He's the Executive Director of the Resonance Science Foundation. A little blurry there for a moment. And he's got something fun to share that we've been working on for a while in addition to the crystal reading.
Hello, everyone. What a great pleasure to be here with you today. I can see from the comments that all of you have received and enjoyed this as much as we have. It really marks an exciting time for us to launch a pattern that we've had in the past and that we've really been working hard to put back into place, which is to bring this information to as many people as possible in a really accessible and free manner for the public. So as part of that pattern today, and as part of this event, and there's going to be more of these to come, it didn't take a lot of arm twisting actually to get Nassim to agree to, well, that's a very strange effect, to get to agree to do this public event. But we're launching something today called the Explorer's Path. So we want to invite you to come explore with us. Come explore this information. Come see the kind of discussions that we're having within the Resonance Academy. Come see the kind of events that we're putting together, the technologies that we're bringing to the forefront for people to understand and to explore. Come get more into this information because there's just so much to unpack. We haven't even begun to scratch the surface with this call. There were so many good questions that flew by. I know William struggled to even select one of them. And we actually crawl all through these afterwards and we compare notes with each other and we go, oh, wow, look at this question, because it's really exciting for us to see the level of engagement, the level of inquiry, the level of questioning that people have around these different topics. And there's so many places to go. So come to the Resonance Academy. We're launching this today. The Explorer's Path. There's a whole wealth of information that you can explore for free. Just come in and give us your email address so we can communicate with you and send you more information about what else is available. And join, there's no obligation, and there's lots of incredible information in there so you can participate in these conversations. And if you're excited about it, of course, we would love to have you dive deeper, dive farther into the Resonance Academy, dive into our course material. We have a college level course, an amazing 6-module course called the Delegate, Exploring the Connected Universe, the Delegate Program. It's an incredible course that takes you through all the fundamental aspects of this information up to the current state of the art, just right about to the stage of the publishing of the holographic mass paper. And of course, you get a live with Nassim once a month. You get to have these kinds of conversations, except a lot more intimate, where you actually get to ask questions, raise your hand, your questions get featured, you get to come up on the camera, you get to engage with Nassim directly. We also do with our staff, we do a question series that happens every month as well. You get that as part of the Academy. And then you get to engage with William and with Teresa and with Marshall and with Adam, Apollo, and Jamie Janover and all the faculty and all the staff. We all join on those calls as often as possible and just go across, we go everywhere. Wherever anybody wants to go, we go there. We talk about it. We have fun. We laugh together. We really enjoy it. So today is an invitation. It's an invitation to all of you to come play with us. Come explore with us. There's amazing information for us all to discover together because we all have something to add.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. This is, we have for a long time, we want to make this information available to everyone. And this is our chance today, both of these kind of public events, which we'll keep on doing, as Chris said, and also the Explorer Path. You get clips from the live events and lots of science news and articles and everything, just to give you a taste of what we're exploring. But as Chris said, there's nothing like being inside. We have a lot of fun in here. So Nassim, I'm going to spotlight you again. Thanks for staying on and for your time today. I really appreciate it. And let's definitely have more of these public events. I love the energy today with everybody on. I know you did too. And how about some closing comments for the community that's listening, just from your heart today?
Well, I was thinking, we're such an important, like, what is the science telling us? Well, the science telling us that we matter. And I mean it literally as well, so pardon the pun, but we are part of this amazing network, this amazing will work of nature. And everything around us is part of it as well, like the table, this chair you're sitting on, and everything, the computer that's running over there, and all this, and to to take time every day to actually just experience that, like to just stop all the activities that take us away from that awareness, and to just get into the center of ourselves and experience the awareness of connectivity, the experience of feeling connected to the plants around you, to the material world around you, of everything, through the inside connectivity of your proton with everything else. I think, if people take a few minutes a day to make that happen, then the awareness becomes more and more present in your life. It changes the way you behave. It changes the way you interact with each other, because you feel that connection. It changes, even maybe the way you interact with your lover, your partner, your wife, your kids, all this. It really, you start to get a really deep feeling that everything is actually supporting everything, that you are supported, that you're not an insignificant microbe in the universe. You're like part of this infinite will work of nature that's changing continuously, that's modifying continuously as a result of everybody's experience interacting with this field. And so you can become a vacuum engineer at the highest level, and as you become a vacuum engineer, you can think of you're increasing the amount of information that's flowing through you. So the vortex that you're making in space, the coherent bubble that you're producing in space is getting larger and has more impact on the overall field. And when you feel that, you feel this amazing reverence for nature and for the world. And it's profound. And I think that if we feel that every day, then maybe we can all move together at a deeper level of awareness, and that leads to direct application to deeper level of technologies, and they're coming, and they're critical to our evolution, because it's not about only inside and it's not about only outside. It's, as William was saying, always both, the chicken and the egg. And so so to take that time, and then come and take the delegate program course and play with us, and like that we can talk every month and have a good time and learn together and grow together. And until next time, well, may the vacuum be with you.
Thank you, Nassim. So nice to be with you today. And William, thanks for coming on this session today. I know it was short notice for you, and I'm always really glad to have your presence on the call. You share so much, and thought maybe you had some closing words for the community today.
Closing words? Yes. Vacuum engineers. That was great. Resonance engineers, because, if I could add some of the biological perspective to this, the biological system, the big picture is it's like a biocrystalline oscillator. So, it's functioning via frequency and resonance. And obviously, that resonance, that frequency is going to be affected by your state of being. And, just as we were talking about that feedback mechanism and how that underlies awareness, self-awareness, your emotional state is very much a part of that self-awareness feedback mechanism. So having perhaps moments of introspection to see what your state is doing and knowing that that is affecting your biocrystalline oscillator and hence how you are connecting with the PSU vacuum matrix and, hence connecting with everything. So I think that we can bring a higher level of awareness, a higher level of cognizance to our information exchange, and that will have extremely significant effects, not only on the individual level. I very much enjoy having coherence in my experiences and how things unfold. But even at a collective level, we can bring perhaps a greater interconnectivity between our personal relationships and our community, our society, community, and who knows what kind of ripple effects this could have. So unified physics is not just for the theoretical minded. It's got some good applications. So thank you everybody for joining us. It's been a fantastic and enlightening conversation. Thank you, Nassim, Chris, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you, William. Let's see if I can go on the gallery view. Hopefully everybody can see us all here in the gallery. And so once again, we're glad you could join us in the Resonance Academy's virtual classroom. And we hope that you'll join the Explorer Path, jump on and see what we have to offer, and come in and join this incredible learning community. We're exploring these ideas and really having a lot of fun. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again really soon. Bye, and thanks again to Sim, Chris, William.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Appreciate.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.